Ashley here, play-by-play for the Abby Canucks. You got it locked in the line change, a Vancouver Canucks podcast.
Yesterday, we looked at the numbers, the cap space, the roster needs, and the pure logistics of moving a player like Elias Pettersson. But let's be honest, NHL trades aren't just made on spreadsheets. They're made in smoke-filled rooms, fueled by a dangerous cocktail of hope, desperation, and the absolute conviction that we are the ones who can fix them. What's up, Canucks Nation? Welcome back to The Line Change. And if you're new to the channel, welcome to The Line Change. Today, we're stepping away from the rationale and entering pure speculation territory. We're getting inside the heads of the GMs from our last video on Elias Pettersson, which, by the way, you guys can check out right here. How does a team like Carolina, for example, or Pittsburgh talk themselves into such a risk on a guy like Elias Pettersson? And more importantly, which mystery team is about to convince themselves that they are the destined destination? Buckle up, because it's time to look at the inside logic of why NHL GMs might just risk it all for EP40. So let's check this out. This article written by Stefan Roger, who wrote the previous one as well. And as you can see here, he highlights the title here: how interested teams are going to internally convince themselves to trade for Canucks' Elias Pettersson this summer. Of course, he mentions that we left off with a mention that for each of the teams listed, there was still plenty of debate to be had about whether Pettersson was the right target for them, or if he was worth the considerable risk that he represents. We mentioned that each of the teams would definitely have to hold some intense internal discussions on the topic and would effectively have to convince themselves to trade for Pettersson against all reasons to the contrary. So he talks about how, below goes into pure speculation territory. Let's start off with the Carolina Hurricanes that we mentioned. It's all about the system. It seems that pretty much everyone who goes to Carolina ends up playing well for them. And this is something that Canucks fans know well. They watched Jalen Chatfield, for example, go from a tweener cast-off in Vancouver. Do you guys remember him being a part of the Canucks? To a borderline top-pairing defender with the Hurricanes. And credit largely goes to one of the strongest team systems in all of hockey. Of course, personal credit here probably goes to Coach Rod Brind'Amour. And if there's one thing that defines Brind'Amour hockey, it's work ethic. Something that obviously a lot of people have questioned when it comes to Elias Pettersson. If things like conditioning and mental preparedness are truly part of the issue for Pettersson, it's hard to imagine a better role model than the guy they still called Rod the Bod. If Brind'Amour can't get Pettersson back on the right track, at that point, who can? Then again, Brind'Amour's history says that he can. Combine this with the Hurricanes' general inability to break through in the ultra-competitive East and the ridiculous abundance of cap space that we talked about in that previous video, and we can see them talking about how they can be a difference maker for Pettersson and how he can be a difference maker for them. Going over to the Detroit Red Wings. Obviously, the Red Wings have to be thinking about draft lotteries, not future ones, but past ones. Detroit has had a really bad run of luck at the lottery, and despite being out of the playoffs for most of the last decade, the highest they've drafted is 4th overall. To be clear, the Wings have nailed most of their picks since Stevie Y, as in Steve Yzerman, took over anyway. They got Lucas Raymond with that 4th overall selection, Mo Seider at 6th overall, and Simone Edvinsson at 6th too. Not to mention, they got Axel Sandin Pellikka from the Canucks, if you guys remember that one too. That was a part of the Filip Hronek trade. But Detroit has to be wondering how much further ahead they'd be if they had just won 1 or 2 of those lotteries. The Canucks could have been said to have won a draft lottery of their own by picking Elias Pettersson at 5th overall in the 2017 entry draft. Pettersson, of course, remains the top scorer in that draft, though Cale Makar will, of course, pass him soon enough. And before his fall off, he looked like a real draft coup. If the Red Wings could just steal Pettersson away and then reignite his game, it'd be a sort of workaround to getting the sort of talent they should have rightly acquired through the draft lottery in the first place, kind of. Moving over to the LA Kings once again. This one we're calling the Bridging the Gap. The Kings were once thought to have most well-stocked prospect cupboard in the entire NHL. Of course, that's no longer the case anymore. The youth movement hasn't turned out nearly as well as it was expected to. Guys like Quinton Byfield, for example. And the Kings are kind of stuck between their glory generation of Drew Doughty and Anze Kopitar and a stunted new core of names like Brandt Clarke and the aforementioned Quinton Byfield. Age-wise, Pettersson fits nicely in between, which might allow LA to skate that narrow gap known as the retool, a word that Canucks fans know all too well. Replacing the retiring Anze Kopitar with Pettersson is a downgrade for now, but it might allow the Kings to stay somewhat competitive as they attempt to restock their future assets and take another swing at building something sustainable. Let's take a look at the New York Islanders now. Well, for one, we suspect that Lou Lamoriello is still not so secretly pulling the strings for the Islanders, and that implies some short-term thinking. The Islanders should make the playoffs this year somewhat against expectations, despite a forward group that seems lacking in skill. With Matthew Schaefer now in place, there's really not much reason to look back anyway. And so the impetus seems to be to build up as strong a roster around him as quickly as possible. If a pseudo onesie were to become available for somewhat cheaply, the Islanders would have to at least talk about the potential of pilfering the Canucks, which is something they reportedly did around the 2026 trade deadline. When they talk about it again this summer, they might reasonably point out that the last pseudo onesie they acquired from Vancouver turned out very well and is pretty much a de facto onesie these days. Speaking of which, any internal discussion about bringing in Pettersson almost certainly involves asking Bo Horvat his opinion and probably weighing it heavily. Next up, we have, of course, the Philadelphia Flyers. This is our hardest one to imagine because, well, we just don't know who will be involved in these discussions. If Tocchet is still the head coach of the Flyers this summer, which, there is a chance that he may not last potentially a full year, we have to imagine that any internal chats start with a recognition that Pettersson and Tocchet did not find much success together, and that Pettersson's fall off kind of coincides fairly neatly with Tocchet's arrival as his coach. I know some people will say, well, what about 23-24? Well, I would say that's a bit of an outlier because, Tocchet had just come in and, he obviously replaced Bruce Boudreau, halfway through the season. And then the following year, Pettersson kind of did well at the start and then dropped off around, the All-Star break. And after that, couldn't get back to that way. So there's that. But if Tocchet is still the head coach, we obviously imagine the Flyers internally talking themselves out of trading for Pettersson as a result. So in a way, you could kind of rule out the Flyers in this, if that is the case and if they decide to keep Tocchet around. Moving on to the Pittsburgh Penguins, if Horvat were involved in the Islanders discussions, we imagine Sidney Crosby might get called for an opinion here. The ask would be whether or not he believes he can mentor Pettersson out of his current extended slump. And we reckon that Crosby might be the hockey leader most equipped for the job. Beyond that, GM Kyle Dubas has to be aware that he's laying a foundation for what comes after Crosby. Planning for an outright teardown may not be realistic, as the Penguins have done a nice job developing younger talent already, and that exact same talent will still be in place when the next stage comes. Finding someone in that middle generation to take as much of the load as possible from the retiring Crosby and Evgeny Malkin might be seen as important, and there are only ever going to be so many centers available for trade in this league. Plus, as a little side note, wouldn't the Penguins want to help out their former GM, Jim Rutherford? Probably. Moving on to the mystery team that we talked about. And yes, it is the Toronto Maple Leafs. So here's the bonus team, and the word is arrogance. Only the Maple Leafs could think that they could move on from one cantankerous 1C with diminishing returns in Austin Matthews, then find success with another in Elias Pettersson. But doesn't that sound almost exactly like something that the Maple Leafs would do? Most could look at this situation and rightly predict that Pettersson would have an even worse time with the Toronto market than he has in Vancouver, because we all know how the Toronto market is. But the Maple Leafs have bet against that reality time and time again, and it's gotten them nowhere fast. To convince themselves that they are destined, or the destined destination that can turn Pettersson around, is exactly the kind of thinking we've got out of Toronto of late. Toronto's internal discussions around Pettersson might sound something like Tobias Funk considering an open marriage on Arrested Development. Will it work out? No, it never does. I mean, these people somehow delude themselves into thinking it might, but it might work for us. So that is the article. And so I want to know what you guys think. Let me know in the comment section down below your thoughts on each of these teams and the inside logic behind these GMs willing to risk it all for Elias Pettersson. Let me know in the comments what you guys think. And let's take a look at the NHL betting odds for today, which is March 30th, 2026. Can't believe we are almost at the end of March, almost April. Or, yeah, I guess technically April will be in a couple of days. But let's take a look and see here. You know what? Speaking of them, Maple Leafs, let's do the Leafs and the Anaheim Ducks. The Maple Leafs are a plus 1.5 and a minus 142. On the puck line, the Anaheim Ducks are a minus 1.5 and a plus 120. On the puck line, Leafs are a plus 160 on the money line, and the Ducks are a minus 192 on the money line. Just a reminder, these odds are, of course, subject to change. And, of course, please play responsibly. Now, a shout out and thank you to the sponsor of this video, none other than DraftKings Sportsbook, which is an official sports betting partner of the NHL. DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NHL, is built for the fastest game on ice. With player props and live betting, every shift, every shot, every save gives you options to get in on the game with DraftKings Sportsbook. New customers bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you get $300 in bonus bets instantly. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code THPN, that's code THPN, to turn $5 into $300 in bonus bets if your bet wins. In partnership with DraftKings, the crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY. In Connecticut, call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. On behalf of Boot Hill Casino in Kansas, wager tax pass-through may apply in Illinois, 21 plus in most states. Void in Ontario, restrictions apply. Bet must win to receive bonus bets, which will expire in 7 days. Minimum odds required. For additional terms and responsible gaming resources, see dkng.co/audio. This is a limited time offer. Copyright 2026 NHL, all rights reserved. This video has been a presentation of both DraftKings Sportsbook as well as the Hockey Podcast Network. Be sure to check out the network for your favorite podcast covering your favorite team at thehockeypodcastnetwork.com, the home of hockey podcasts, where it's every team, everywhere. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button and subscribe to The Line Change, and be sure to have your notifications turned on so you don't miss more in-depth analysis of your Vancouver Canucks. Once again, drop your comments down below. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you guys on the next Line Change.